Welcome to the Care Right podcast, your go-to resource for all things elder care. Guiding us through this journey is Annalee Kruger, the founder of Care Right Incorporated, and she has been steadfastly supporting families across the United States. Each episode brings you expert insights, innovative strategies, and practical advice, ensuring that you're well equipped to provide the best possible care for your loved ones. Expect to gain valuable knowledge, learn from real-life stories, and get inspired to take action in your own caregiving journey. So buckle up as we dive into an in-depth discussion of elder care planning and together embrace the journey of caring for aging loved ones on the Care Right podcast.
Hello, everyone. This is Katana Avid, and I want to welcome you to Smart Women Talk, where I search the world for smart women and a few good men. And this includes best-selling authors, thought leaders, and change agents who are on that leading edge. So our topics are things like money, business, health, and, of course, inspiration. So for those listening live today on one of our on the Contact Talk Radio Network, I want to share that it is November, which is National Caregivers Month. So for the last few years, we have been honoring this because it's the time where we honor those people in our lives that are caregivers. And so we're interviewing President of Care Right, Inc., and you'll know why when you get to meet her, because she is such an expert in this area. And Annalee Kruger is the president of this organization, and she is going to talk about the importance of having an aging plan. You might say, what the heck is an aging plan? Well, we're going to talk about the true toll of caregiving without a plan, what an aging plan is and why it's important to have one, and ways to avoid caregiver burnout. So in a moment, I'll introduce you to Annalee, but first I'm going to share my tip, and I'm going to begin with a quote by Rosalind Carter. She said there are only 4 types of people: those who have been caregivers, those who are caregivers, those who receive care, and those who will be caregivers in the future. That's all of us, guys. So are you prepared for that call from one of your parents or a loved one that could turn your life upside down? Do you have an aging plan in place? And have you talked with your children about your wishes if something should happen to you or you need assistance? And when I say children or parents, it may be just loved ones that are in our life, because at some point, all of us will need someone. So the secret is to be prepared so that when a triggering event happens, you will feel confident for making decisions, and everyone involved will understand what's expected. So I've seen this. For the last 30 years, I've been helping clients plan for retirement, but it's always included how they will address the issues of aging and remaining independent. And I've experienced it personally as the designated daughter with my grandmother, with my great aunt, with hundreds of clients. But this personal thing of being the designated daughter, I was 47 when I received the call in the night from my mom. And what she said was, Dale's in the hospital. He cracked his head open when he fell at the health club. The doctors say he has lung cancer. It hit me like a ton of bricks. But I thought I knew what was ahead of me because I had planned for this 12 years ago when they were first married. Back then, my stepfather was 74. My mom was 58, younger than me. So since I was a financial planner, they had agreed to do a financial plan with me. So very typically, my wonderful stepfather wanted to put everything in joint ownership with my mother. But my mom was almost the age of his kids, and his children could have been disinherited. So I suggested there was a better way. What ended up happening is we met with our team. They set up wills, powers of attorney, long-term care policies, consolidated their investments into a brokerage account in the trust. And this special trust we set up would make sure my mother had income after her death, but at her death, everything would go to his kids. And because my parents and I had these important conversations, and I want you to be listening to this and thinking about your own situation, we were able to put a financial and estate plan in place so that I was able to pay their bills, file their tax returns, access medical records. Actually, I advocated on his behalf in the hospital with the doctor. We were able to manage their investments and create income for them. Also, the big one, we were able to transact real estate. Like we sold his home. I was successor trustee with his son. So we were able to sell his house and then set up a agreement, by signing paperwork to move him into assisted living after he left the hospital and rehab. But this is the key. We never had to go to court for guardianship. There was no probate. It was like a blink, after he passed. And most importantly, we were able to focus on the quality of their life and the quality of their care during their end of life transition. Now, this just gives me goosebumps. So today, the key is planning and doing it as soon as possible when options are plentiful and affordable. So now I'm going to introduce you to Annalee, and she's going to share some of her wisdom and her strategies of how to avoid caregiver burnout and what you need to do to be prepared. So let me tell you a little bit about her. Annalee Kruger she worked as a social worker in the long-term care field for over 18 years. She had families coming to tour with her who were blindsided by medical crises every day. And often their loved one was in the hospital, like mine was, remember? And the family was told to go find a facility by noon tomorrow. That's exactly what happened to me, but I was able to advocate on his behalf. So nearly every family member had no idea what their loved one already had in place for a plan, what their resources or insurance was, if they had medical or financial directives in place, and they had no idea of what to look for and ask for about during that tour. So in 2011, Annalee built CareRight to help families across the country talk about what is in place, what's working well, what's not working well, and to develop an aging plan proactively. That's the key. But I do want to point out, if you have missed the boat and you're in a crisis, there's still a plan for you. So Annalee, welcome to Smart Women Talk. I'm so happy you could be here to celebrate National Caregivers Month.
Thank you, Katana. I'm excited to be here too. And I just want to do a huge shout out for all of our family caregivers out there who have been at it, whether it's 4 hours that they've been a caregiver or 20 years. And I also want to do a quick shout out to all of our veterans as well, since we just had Veterans Day.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So I shared my personal story. And then I know when we talked, we just realized we have so much in common. and the neat thing is that, I really focus on being proactive, and because I'm a financial planner, I want to work with people to prepare for all this, like I did for my folks. But quite often, like you said, most of the time people, we put it off. And so the event happens, but there's always a plan for people, and you know how to handle the caregiver stress, and because you're a social worker background, how to get through this and create a plan after the fact. So I'd love for you to share just briefly your personal story about. You had a experience. You told me about it, this accident, and you were prepared in how that helped you.
Absolutely.
Because it's not just for caregiving. It could be something happens to you in an accident. You don't have to be old. You were young when this happened.
That's exactly right. And that's the point I want to get across to all of the listeners, is that you don't have to be old or a senior or, an elderly person to be putting these plans in place. I am a national speaker on aging issues. I had just come back from China at a speaking engagement. Then I was in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, working with some families because I came from the Milwaukee area. I built my business in Milwaukee. So I was in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. This is 4 days after my 40th birthday. And I came across this gentleman walking up the street, and it turns out his name was John. And I am from Iowa, and we are friendly folks there. And I said, "Hi, how are you?" And he gave me this whole long laundry list of all of his medical issues, which is sometimes what you can expect if you ask someone who's older how they are. And so I love that. I love that people are open and willing to share. And so we were talking, and all of a sudden we made it up to the intersection, and we are waiting for the light to change so that we can cross. The light changed, we crossed. He's telling me more about his health issues. And all of a sudden he yells, "Watch out." And the next thing I know, I'm literally getting up off the street. And I get up and I'm thinking, what the heck just happened here? And then I look around and there's all this broken glass and broken reflectors on the street. I thought, well, that's odd. That wasn't just there. And then I look up a little bit further as I'm walking, and there's the bus parked all crooked across the street. So what happened is the bus driver was distracted by the 29 kids on the bus, and she blew through the intersection. So instead of stopping for the intersection, she was actually looking up in that little like rear view mirror that they have in the bus and yelling at the kids to sit down and be quiet. And she blew through the intersection, and she did not apply the brakes until she saw my face break the headlight of the school bus. So this is 4 days after my 40th birthday. So for all of you listening out there, I'm telling you, life has its own agenda. If I would have known that morning when I woke up that I was going to get hit by a school bus and have a broken face, obviously, and broken ribs and some internal injuries, I certainly would have just stayed in bed or certainly not crossed the street. So because I've worked in healthcare and crisis management my entire career, I know that people's life can be peachy 1 second and not the next, which is exactly what happened to me. I know that people can have a latent brain injury or brain bleed, and I wasn't sure if I had one of those or not, since I did just get hit in the face with a school bus. And so I carry my mini grab and go binder, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, through this podcast. But I carry my living will, my power of attorney, the list of my emergency contacts. I also carry my do not resuscitate. And so when all these witnesses came running out, because this was over the noon hour, when all these witnesses came running out, because I was afraid that I was going to have a brain bleed, I wanted to make sure that I could communicate everything to these witnesses. So I gave each of these witnesses a snippet of me to report to the ambulance in case I lost consciousness. And so I pulled out my mini grab and go binder. By then the ambulance came, and I presented her with my documents. And I said, I don't know if I'm going to lose consciousness, but just in case, here's what my wishes are. And she said, I have never in 28 years of being an EMT ever had anybody in the back of the wagon, because that's what they call it. I've never had anybody in the back of the wagon ever present documents. She said, I wish everybody would do that because it takes the guessing out of what it is we're supposed to do. And so my point in all of this is not only, I don't care how old you are, you have to have your documents in order. The second piece of that is that you have to actually communicate what you have in order. So for example, my parents, because I'm single and I have no children, so my siblings and my parents are my people, right? And so my whole family, they know exactly what my wishes are. They know exactly how far I want a medical team to go as far as like bringing me back, or not bringing me back because I'm a do not resuscitate, but like how much effort do I want them to put into me. And they also know, because obviously I'm a business owner, they know, my family knows like who I use for corporate payroll, my corporate attorney. They know everything that they need to know, accounts and passwords, where my 401k is. They know my financial advisor's name and contact information. They know my disability insurance. They know everything they need to know if something happens to me. And that's so critical.
And passwords.
And passwords. And they have a copy of my grab and go binder, the full grab and go binder. They have a copy of that because I'm in Florida. I have family in Iowa and family in Wisconsin. And certainly if there's a medical crisis, we need to make this as easy as possible for our families so that they can be at the hospital advocating for us versus scrambling, trying to find where all these documents are.
Wow. Isn't that wonderful? Do we know what percentage of the population have something like this in place?
That I don't know, but I can tell you not very many. And
I don't think so.
And the people who do think that they have their stuff in order, when I work with them on the grab and go binder project that I do with my clients, I always say dust off the documents that you probably got in place 10 or 15 years ago, and let's see if they still make sense. Are the people that you named still alive? Do they have dementia? Can they help make decisions for you? Do you still have a relationship with them? So I'm not an attorney, but they can simply just look at their documents and say, oh yeah, these reflect what I'm still wishing. So it's really important.
And it's amazing. We get to something like the will. I don't know if people realize this. There's only one original will. Mm-hmm. And so if you can't find it, people are in trouble. You have to find the original. And so the one that you're given quite often is a copy. And like we just updated all our documents, and our attorney says the will is going to be in the will safe of the law firm. Mm-hmm. So then the law firm, I'm going to have to keep my eyes on it and make sure that, they don't get bought out or changed. The other option is getting a safe deposit box or putting it at, like in my case, it would be Oakland County. Mm-hmm. So there's so much people need to know, but even having a copy of the will in that grab and go binder is important.
Mm-hmm. Right. Having a copy of everything, because I can, when I talk to families and when I do these podcasts and speaking engagements, my perspective is coming at it from the consumer who did not plan ahead, because 92% of my families come to me in crisis because they didn't plan ahead, or they didn't think to, or they just, it never occurred to them. Oh yeah, dad has dementia. What should we do about that? So people get busy, and I get that. And it doesn't occur to them until they're kind of forced into it, really, to say, oh, we need to step back and figure out what are we going to do with mom and dad now that they're aging, and maybe there's dementia, and should they be living at home, and what's that picture look like? And so, the reality is that 92% of my families come to me in crisis. So for those of you who may not have put a plan together proactively, don't worry. There's still options and opportunities. It's just that obviously if you wait till there's a crisis, your options are going to be much more limited. And it's going to be much more expensive to figure out what your options are. So for example, if you have to hire an attorney to come out to the hospital to meet with your family, they're going to charge a lot of money if they have to do that on a weekend. And if you can just do this all proactively, you're going to save yourself a lot of time, money, and stress. The other thing to think about is, what do you have in place for care? When I meet with these families, these adult children, when I talk to them, or when they call, because they're the ones that call me, because they're the ones that are burned out, having to come to the rescue of mom and dad every time there's a medical crisis, I say, well, what do they already have in place? And they say, I don't know. We can't even talk to them about that. Every time we try, we get so much pushback from them that we just stop trying, or they just don't know how to have these conversations. It's not like this is typical, dinner conversations. It's usually about the Packers and the Bears. So
when I shared my story, that's totally atypical.
Right.
And my stepfather, I was just shocked that he was willing to have this conversation. He did this whole plan. I mean, he went above and beyond. He had former IRS agent, so he had everything all written out, and he welcomed this. And there was one day when I came to his house, and there was this bookshelf in the middle of his Florida room filled with papers. And I said, what's going on here? Why is this here? Oh, the paperwork's getting too much for me. I said, would you like me to take it over? Oh, that would be so nice. So we even got to put the financial management, over, and, I was able to take that over before he was even in the hospital. So that was like what could happen, but most of the time it doesn't. My friend, she's a financial planner, and she had one of those situations where the, father wouldn't talk about it no matter what. And he ended up with dementia. So,
right.
So that is the more of a typical story, is where the family doesn't want to talk about it.
Well, and it's challenging. I mean, and it's kind of like an onion. I mean, there's so many different layers because, in my experience, it does not seem like, and I've been a social worker for 25 years. So when I first started as a social worker, working with families, putting an aging plan in place, I could easily go to Ethel and Marvin's house, and the kids could easily gather around the kitchen table because they lived down the block. But as families started growing apart, the landscape of families now is that, most of them don't live even in the same zip code, let alone time zone. And so when families started kind of moving apart from each other, if they didn't invest the time, the effort, the energy, and the resources needed to maintain relationships with each other, then when that medical crisis happens with mom or dad or both, they have to get reacquainted as siblings and then figure out what their options are. And families don't seem to be as close knit as they used to be. And the other challenge is, employers aren't like they used to be. They don't always seem as necessarily family friendly, and they can only do so much for support for their employees who are caregivers. Because at some point you're going to have to put an aging plan in place just to keep your job. And we can talk about the statistics on employees who are caregivers and what that really looks like.
Yeah, because it is Caregivers Month, and let's talk a little bit about the typical family caregiver. Are they working? Is it a woman? And because I do know that 70% of the issues around coming to work late, having to leave early, have to do with being a caregiver. That's a huge number.
Right. And I've got some information here from the Alzheimer's Association, as well as Genworth did a study in 2018 on just the toll of, the financial picture. Genworth it's called Genworth Beyond Dollars 2018. They did a caregiver study. 46% of family caregivers had to work fewer hours because the needs of their loved one exceeded what they were able to accomplish, after work. So 46% basically had to cut their hours with their employers, which obviously equates to less income. 35% of family caregivers have repeated work absences, because when they get that crisis call, what do? They have to leave work to go, or they miss work. 30%. This is why it's such an aging crisis we have out there that we need to address with these families. Is 30% of family caregivers missed career opportunities. They declined that job promotion because it's going to be that much more responsibility or travel. And then they can't have the availability that they need to take care of their aging parents. Some of my daughters, because it is primarily women who get the brunt of being a family caregiver for a lot of different reasons. But a lot of my daughters, when they call me, they're calling not only just for their mom or their dad, but they're calling because they are overseeing the care of up to 6 aging loved ones. Their parents, their in-laws, their step parents, because we live in the world of a lot of blended families now. And so they've got their parents, their step parents, their in-laws, and then sometimes that stray aunt or uncle who either outlived their kids or never got married. And they're like, hey, Sally's doing such a good job with all these other elderly loved ones. Let's just, let's put Beverly on that caseload too for this daughter. And I always say, this isn't Thanksgiving. There isn't always room for one more, because we know that one aging loved one can end up being a full-time job. The more care that they need, the more availability these families have to have if they don't have a plan together. From a financial perspective. Yeah, from a financial perspective, 48% of family caregivers reduce their own quality of life and their own quality of living because they have to pay for the care of their aging parent, or they've lost some of their income because they had to cut their hours. So it's a major, major financial toll out there on these families. Last night, just real quick, and
can I add one other statistic to that? Because as a financial planner, this idea of retiring early, having to just get out of the workforce, I've seen so many people have to do that. Mm-hmm. And on average, the individual, let's say a woman, loses around $300,000 of and so it can be much bigger, because I know a couple executives who both retired to take care of 3 parents, one of them overseas, but they lose $300,000, and that comes in lost wages, but Social Security credits and pension credits, and then think of the contributions to retirement plans. And what you just said, the opportunities for promotion. So we know it could be way more, but with all the people in the United States, the average is 300,000. That's unbelievable.
Well, and you're absolutely right. And that's, the statistics that I just kind of shared with you, those are just from Genworth. I can tell you just from doing this for a living that every single day I get about 3 crisis calls from families across the country. So last night I got a call from a gentleman, a son-in-law actually, from up in Massachusetts, and he called because he had heard me on a podcast, and he said, I want to learn more about these care options for my mother-in-law, and she has dementia. And when the mother-in-law came to live closer to her family, and his wife is an only child, so there's a whole element to that as well. So when the mother-in-law came to move closer to where her daughter lives, she was in such a bad way, health wise, that the doctors thought she was going to pass away. So she was actually on hospice. And that's what I tell families all the time is I can promise you, if you're not checking in on your parents, things are not going as well as you would like to think that they are. Denial is a great place to be until you can't be there anymore. And then the reality wakes you up and then you have to do something. So he called because his mother-in-law is alive and well. She's doing really great, which is great. But, obviously with dementia, she's physically healthy, but mentally she's very, very confused and needs 24-hour care. So she blew through $500,000 already last 5 years that she's lived near them. So she's depleted all the money that she had. And the family they've already shelled out $100,000 out of their own retirement. They had to dip into their own retirement to pay. They've already paid $100,000. And I said, you need to stop the financial hemorrhaging because this is impacting you. And they're 70 and they're trying to retire. And he goes, I just don't see how we're going to retire when we're paying for my mother-in-law's care at $3,000 a week for home care 24/7. And I said, you absolutely need to be putting a plan in place and I can help you with that. Because what you're doing is not sustainable. And I guess that's my point for all these family members. If you don't have an aging plan, and we'll go over what that actually is, but if you don't have a plan, what you're doing is going to burn you out. It's going to hurt your family relationships. It's going to potentially jeopardize your job and your health. So it's really, really important to be thinking about this now.
And another statistic is 70% of caregivers over 70 die before the care recipient.
Yeah. I have a lot of kids that when they call, they're calling their crisis is because, mom, the primary caregiver of dad, passed away and they were blindsided by that. And that tells me just how really naive these families are, that they don't understand that, again, things are not going as well with your parents at their house as you would like to think. And if you have, being a caregiver to someone who's had a broken hip is much different to someone who has Parkinson's disease or has dementia, who has a chronic condition that will eventually need 24/7 care and supervision. A broken hip, if you're lucky, within 3 to 4 weeks, you're healed and you're hopefully back to baseline and good to go. And so your caregiving stint is pretty intense, but for a short period of time, whereas the aging journey, it's bumpy. There's a lot of in and outs of the hospital. And when these spouses call me, and they're taking care of a loved one with memory issues, they can't get a decent night's sleep. They're not eating well. They lose weight. And it's usually when the kids come around holiday time, then they're like, oh my gosh, we haven't been here to see our parents for 2 years because we don't have enough vacation time to, hit all of these aging loved ones' residences throughout the year. And they're shocked. They're just floored that their parents do not look good. They're not doing well. They're not taking their medication. And they're just blindsided by that. We look at Hurricane Irma, because I'm in Florida, look at Hurricane Irma. We had all these aging loved ones that flew up to be closer to their adult kids out of harm's way. My phone literally rang off the hook with Hurricane Irma because all these kids that I had already done a 30-minute consult with who said, oh, mom and dad are doing fine enough for now. We'll just keep your number. And when things change, we'll call you. Well, guess what? Hurricane Irma happened. And they had their parents up there for a week or two. And they're like, oh my gosh, we didn't know dad was incontinent, or we didn't know that mom was falling every day, or we didn't know dad was so confused. He kept coming into our bedroom at 3:00 in the morning thinking it was time to get up. Or they were with us for a week before we realized they weren't taking their medication. So it's a real problem out there.
So could you talk just briefly about these signs of caregiver burnout? What does,
Mhm.
we can go in the house and see there's some issues here, but the caregiver burnout, and especially, can you even notice caregiver burnout if you're long distance? Like, is there a little
Oh,
red
sure.
flag? Okay.
Oh yeah, you absolutely can, but you have to be keyed into it. I think that's where some families fall short is, we're all in a hurry. I know that when I call my parents, it's usually when I'm, hustling and bustling, en route to somewhere else. And that you really do, you have to really listen to what they're really saying, even if they're not really saying it. So listen for things like, oh, this is really getting hard taking care of your dad, or, dad snuck out of the house again, because they don't want to sometimes really share the extremeness of what's really going on at the house, but they'll give you little cues. You just have to listen for them. But you also, if you're an adult child, you also have to be more mindful and more cognizant of what questions to ask, especially if you don't see them on a regular basis, because a lot of families don't see their kids. And so I always encourage, we're so blessed to live in the world of technology. So, a lot of seniors have a cell phone, or they're on Facebook, they have some sort of technology. This age group of seniors, most of my clients have internet and they're on Facebook and that kind of thing. So I always encourage, do video meetings with your family, do video calls with them so you can actually see them. Are they losing weight? Does your mom look exhausted? How's your dad holding up? Do they look like they're well cared for? Are they bathing? And, if your mom always had her hair done nicely and makeup and lipstick and jewelry, does she still look like that, or is she starting to slip a little bit? And listen to how they talk. Are they able to communicate their needs effectively and answer questions? Are they responding to you appropriately, or are they having trouble finding the right words? Do they ask you the same thing over and over again? That's a sign of some memory issues. Are they crying? Are they tearful? Because that's, seniors are at high risk for depression, and a lot of people don't notice that. Ask them, when's the last time you got out of the house? When's the last time you went to book club? When's the last time you went to church, Bible study? Are you getting out enough to do the things that you want to do? And relationships can be a little bit dicey depending on, your relationship with your parents and so forth. But asking these types of questions where you can get more information, and for sure, actually visit them. That's going to give you a really good picture, because then you can look around the house and say, oh my gosh, it looks like they can't manage their mail because there's, 3 months of mail piled up.
Like I noticed, right?
Right. And when I do these assessments and these family meetings, I have them literally carry me around on the laptop so I can look around the house. I'm like, okay, so we need to talk about mail management. That's what I call it, mail management. Oh, it looks like the house needs some, cleaning. Maybe your parents just can't get to it enough, or they're short of breath, or they have pain. So when you're at the house, look around. Does the refrigerator, is it cooling things properly? Look in the pantry. Are they eating outdated food? Look in the refrigerator. Are they eating outdated food? Look in the medicine cabinet to make sure that what they're actually taking, and who their doctors are, but also if they're not taking outdated medication. I always say, look around the car. Are there more dinks and dents than there might have been last time you were there visiting? And I know this is gutsy sometimes, but have them drive you somewhere. And that way you can get a sense of, okay, how is their reaction time? That driving is a whole nother topic, but jump in the car and have them take you somewhere and see how well they do. So those are just a few things. And ill-fitting clothes is another thing, because weight loss.
Or dirty clothes. Not dirty the laundry.
That's right. Dirty clothes. And when you go to the house, you're going to be able to, in 1 or 2 sniffs or smells, you're going to be able to know if there's some issues there or not. The bathroom and the kitchen are going to be your 2 most telling rooms, because if they're eating expired food, then obviously that's going to not do well with their stomach. So check out the kitchen, because that's going to be pretty telling. What are they actually eating? Are they eating food, or are they eating like cupcakes and potato chips because that's easier for them to eat? And a lot of families don't realize oh, mom, all she eats is junk food. Well, that's because she probably doesn't have enough energy or stamina, or it's too overwhelming to do menu planning and meal preparation. So think about their nutrition. Yeah. And the bathroom is telling, because if it's messy with, bathroom stuff, that's going to tell you that they probably need some help with their assistance going to the bathroom and making sure that they're clean and dry.
Well, and even if the shower is set up safely, because that can always be changed with grab bars. And what I noticed at my folks, she had throw rugs, the old style throw rugs all over the place. And that scared me to death. I had to get those out of there immediately.
Yeah. Yeah. And check the toilets, especially the toilets that they usually use. Are they high enough or low enough? And do they actually work? I've been doing this a long time, and you'd be surprised at things I walk in on, and this is how they live. And because they're too ashamed to say, hey, look, I need help. And so there's a way to broach these things in a very compassionate and very loving way, instead of out of frustration and fear. But there's ways to broach these conversations that will get you a lot further when you come at it from a point of love and compassion versus what the heck is going on in here? How can your house be so messy? And why aren't you taking a bath? If you approach it that way, you will get pushback. I can promise you that.
Right. Right. So there's not this chaos. Okay. What do you suggest families do when the crisis happens? Because I bet a lot of people are listening and they're going, oh my gosh, I'm going to go do this. I'm going to go do an inspection like this. But if they notice that, they may say something, family members may argue with them, there's so many different opinions, right?
Right.
And so what do you suggest they do next?
So this is where families get in a jam, because families don't know how to have these conversations. They don't even know how to lead a family meeting, because they're in uncharted territory, right? This is the first time that they've probably ever had to think about these things. And the adult kids are probably sitting there going, oh my gosh, I don't even know how to bring this up to mom and dad. And your parents are probably thinking, well, I'm the parent. What do you care how much money I have and what my goals are? Well, it is important, because at some point there is going to be a crisis, and there certainly will be a death. And how prepared are you? So there is value. I can tell you there is value with a neutral, third-party trained person to lead the family meeting and say, what are your goals as you age? Is your goal to stay at home? And if so, what does that look like? How much money do you have? Because we know that at some point, if you need 24/7 care, that can be about $4,000 a week for 24/7 care for one caregiver. And if there's two of you and you both plan on staying home, you can do the math. So it's really important to know, where are they from a financial perspective? What do they already have in place for insurance? Is your dad or your loved one a veteran that maybe you can work on some aid and attendance benefits? Is there reverse mortgage as an option? So those are things that I discuss with my clients. Where are we from a financial picture? What are your goals as you age? If your goal is to age in place at home, then be mentally prepared to write out some major big checks every week for home care. There's advantages of staying home, obviously, because some people are just so adamant that they don't want to leave their house. Well, that's fine. But then you have to be willing to let all these different caregivers, 8 or 10 or 15 caregivers potentially come in, and it becomes a revolving door. And those are the complaints that my clients who did choose to stay at home, they don't like the turnover in their caregiver. They feel like they have to train the caregiver every time the caregiver comes. The caregiver doesn't always interact with them because they're on Facebook or YouTube, instead of interacting or providing that kind of service that they're supposed to be providing. And then what's the plan if that caregiver doesn't show up and the home care company can't find a replacement? Who's going to take care of you? So there's some considerations there, in the landscape also,
And I'm sorry, but usually when they want to stay home, isn't there usually a designated daughter who gets it thrown on her or volunteers?
Oh gosh. Yeah. That's the
unpaid.
Problem. That's the problem.
Yeah. Her life,
Yeah, it really does. One of the because I just did some social media outreach, and one of the most common things that people Google is, how do I not kill my mother?
Well, especially if the mother is not a good, loving mother,
right.
My
Right.
mother didn't protect me when I was growing up. I found out there
Mhm.
was probably some mental illness there of some sort. But when she needed care, I stepped right in. And then when I figured it out, because they put her on a drug, that all of a sudden she was like a different person. And it was like,
Mhm.
wow, all my life, But how many women are thrown into this role of caring? Maybe it's a mean father, that was
Right.
abusive to them.
That's right.
And what are
So
you going to do? Say, I'm not going to help you? There's so many issues here.
that's why you call it an onion
An
because
onion.
it really is. Because, when I'm meeting with these families, we're not writing out a grocery list, so there's a lot of past hurts and anger and resentment that comes up in these family meetings for those very same things that you just shared. Well, he was a really crappy father. Why do I care what happens to him? And so there's some families that they've set a very clear boundary that they don't want to be involved or engaged at all in any of this aging planning. And I have to respect that, but then don't come back after the fact and say, well, I wasn't part of this. Right.
Right.
So, so we talk about what is the aging plan? What are your goals? What are your resources? But really, you can have goals and resources, but there's still that extra element of you have to make informed and smart decisions. So when people tell me, because again, I come at this from my experience of what families who didn't put a plan in place, what happens. There's a lot of family fallout, and it doesn't have to be that way. Aging does not have to tear families apart if we can work together as a team and make informed decisions. But you're right. There's, everybody has their own idea of how inheritance should be spent. They have their own idea of what quality of life means for their parents. And it's really a matter of just sorting out these topics with a neutral third-party person that can lead these meetings so that it doesn't end up being just a big family fight. Because that's what happens when families try to do these meetings sometimes on their own. There's too much emotional junk that gets brought up. This way, like when I do it or other people that probably do similar things, I lead it like a compassionate business meeting. Tell me how your family operates. What are your goals? Where does it make sense for you to live? If you live here in Florida, but all 6 of your kids live in 6 different states, where might it make sense for you to live? Because we know as you get older, you're not going to get healthier and more vibrant. Right? You're going to get more dependent and vulnerable, and you will need a care advocate, and you will need to be near someone that can, oversee your care and be there to support you. So where does that make sense to move to? And so we look at different retirement communities based on what our clients can afford. And then we coach these families on what to look for and what to ask about during the tour. And really the goal is to have your loved one on the waiting list of 2 or 3 different communities so that if things change quickly, you're at least have a higher probability of being able to get in for care instead of, winging it. Because the one thing consumers don't think about, and this is why it's so important to work with a trained family facilitator, because families sometimes think it's the Marriott. Oh, I want to go there Tuesday or Wednesday, and that's where I'm going to live. No, you have to financially qualify to get into these communities. You have to physically qualify, and you have to cognitively qualify. And what happens when people have said, well, I'm going to age in place at home and stay home until I can't stay anymore. Well, that's fine. But then you probably just bypassed assisted living level of care. And now the only thing you're going to qualify for is long-term care or nursing home. And that's a very different look and feel and price point.
Absolutely. So let's take a moment right now, because I want to talk about you talked about home care and the costs there. Let's talk about the idea that there's this assisted living and then there is nursing home. And some facilities have independent living, like near us, we have Run. It's an Erickson facility. So they have the independent living, and a lot of professors go there and they have lectures, and it's very nice. And they still drive, but they have to give X amount of dollars, like $500,000 to move in there, but then they promise to keep them. Then they move them to the next level of care, which could be more of assisted living, and then finally the skilled care. Because I do want to share something. My mother went to assisted living, like when I first got them into independent living. And I didn't realize that the long-term care insurance they had wouldn't even cover that. It would only cover it as home care. And they had a very small home care benefit. When they finally, they wouldn't do the medicine or help with dressing or going to the bathroom and all that. But when I got my mother to Sunrise Assisted Living, they have a memory care there, but she was pretty independent when she first got there. And because he had purchased long-term care insurance for her, she had like 60% of her long-term care benefit could go towards this assisted living. This was one of these really older policies. So it had percentages and that kind of thing. But between the survivor pension he left her and this long-term care benefit, the two of them came to $7,000 tax, pretty much tax free. Well, anyway, $7,000 per month. We never had to touch his money or her savings. So can you talk a little bit about those three levels of care and how people end up paying for it and what your feeling is about the long-term care insurance? Because you can't buy it for the parents. It's too late. But for all of us listening, does it make sense to do this? Because,
right.
I would like to know.
Yeah. So let's kind of unpack that a little bit. So when we talk about all these different levels of care, because some people just think that you either have assisted living or nursing home, but there's all these other different levels of care in between. But the reality is that these communities are licensed for different levels of care. So if families, again, families are calling me because they're in a crisis. They chose a facility and then now they're getting the notice that they have to discharge because now their loved one requires too much care for what that facility is licensed for, right? Because sometimes consumers just, you don't know what you don't know. And so you make decisions and then they're not always the most informed decisions. So when families think about continuing care retirement communities, there is it's called a community entrance fee. And it can be hundreds of thousands of dollars. There's some that are $1 and $2 million just to get in. And then you still have a monthly room and board fee and a monthly care fee and medication management fee. And if you're a couple, then you have a second person fee, per month, which can range anywhere from $500 to, I've seen it on up to $1,600 in the Chicago market per month. So it gets pretty hefty, but the value is that they will take care of you. And so you have the peace of mind knowing that as your physical needs change, as your cognitive needs change, they will take care of you. You have a place on their campus until you pass away. So you might have to, start out in independent living and work through to assisted living and then eventually memory care or the long-term care side. But at least you have the peace of mind knowing that you're not going to get booted out. So that's one thing, but not everybody can afford that, right? And so when you think about most people's budgets, most people can't shell out, $1 million to have life care. So there's different kinds of options, and that's why we help families, look through those contracts and help you and work with your financial planner to say, okay, what makes the most sense here? Which kind of contract should you consider? But there's other communities that, like assisted living, there's some that are just month to month rentals, like you would in an apartment. But when you run out of money or you exceed their licensed care level, you have to move out. And then where are you going to go? And so, if we fast forward to when you run out of money, if you don't want to run out of money, and that's why we're going to next talk about long-term care insurance. You don't want to run out of money because, obviously there's a lot of people who have run out of money, whether they didn't plan well or right after retirement, they had a major medical health issue and, they've depleted their funds through medical care. But the landscape of healthcare is that in long-term care, they've cut the capacity for Medicaid beds. So when I first started as a social worker 25 years ago, all beds were duly certified Medicare and Medicaid. But in the last 10, 15 years, because there's so many people that run out of money, they've decertified. So if you have a 100-bed facility, they may only offer 8 or 10 beds for Medicaid patients. And so that's why we end up with families that live 2 or 3 or 4 hours away in a nursing home, because that's where there was a Medicaid bed and you don't get much choice. You have to go where there's an opening. And if you don't have family checking in
like
on you,
this, we have to call and find a bed, and right?
Yep.
For Medicaid, you have to find a bed. It's the most horrible thing.
Yeah,
So,
and like I said, they usually don't have a lot of openings, and they don't even take waiting lists anymore, especially down here in the Florida market. They're like, we get Medicaid calls every day. We're just like, call back later. Well, they just don't have a bed, and that's why you see families driving 3 or 4 hours one way, and they can't see their loved one very often because now it's a hardship for them. So you have to plan ahead, not only from a family and a caregiving perspective, but from a financial perspective. Let's talk about long-term care insurance. And I just keep in mind, I don't sell it. I study it, but I don't sell it right now. So I can tell you though, from doing admissions and working in long-term care settings, you are going to be much more desirable if you have some sort of payment solution or financial solution to pay for care. Because we know that, a nursing home can run $12,000, $14,000 a month, depending on where you live. But you also, if you do have long-term care insurance or you're considering getting it, you want to make sure that you've got a policy or an affordable policy that will provide you as much coverage as long as possible. We know that we're living longer and that we are trying to be healthier as we age. And so, that's going to maybe push back your retirement because you're going to need more money to eventually pay for care. So I'm starting to see clients that even have like whole life policies. They don't have necessarily the long-term care insurance, but they have the life insurance with a long-term care rider. So we're starting to see that as well as an option. But I would strongly encourage anyone who is listening to this, really sit back and think, how much can you swing financially? If you ended up needing $4,000 a week in home care, how long would you be able to afford that and still not deplete your funds and end up in a nursing home, Medicaid nursing home? So like I said earlier on this podcast, you have to financially qualify to get into these communities, and you will be more desirable if you do have long-term care insurance. It's
and I wanted to share something about that because I have done the insurance for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
As a CFP, that was one of the most important things, is to make sure that I could help people protect what they had, especially in aging, and you can see how it worked. But the old policies were these: you pay, and if you don't use it, you lose it. That's what my mom had, and she used it. But the newer policies, I just talked to a woman who she's does a lot of stuff in caregiving, and it was interesting. We were doing a panel, and she said she just bought an annuity that has a long-term care rider.
Yep.
And the other thing you can do is you can buy life insurance now. I'm looking at one for someone. It's $1 million. It has $500,000 of chronic illness, which is even more broad than the definition for long-term care. So they can have that money there for heirs, for survivor income to the spouse. But if you need it for long-term care, you can actually access, in that case, $500,000 over a 4-year period, tax-free. And that if you don't need it, it actually something goes to the survivors, whoever you name as beneficiary.
Right. So and that's what I have, and so you all know that 4 days after my 40th, I got hit by a school bus, but I'm 47 and I have planned myself based on my affluent clients. I basically just do a watered down version of what they do. And they all have like insurance and annuities and long-term care. I mean, they're just like layered up, and they have a really great financial planner as well. And so I just have, basically.
And you know what I just noticed?
What?
We are out of time. I cannot believe this.
I know, they go so fast, don't they?
This has gone so quickly. I'm going to let everyone know here. Annalee and I have talked about it. We're going to do a webinar. If you're interested, either join smartwomen.com, go there and watch for an invitation, or email me at katana@katanaabbott.com. So, but Annalee, can you please give out your how they can contact you?
Sure. So my phone number, you can call me directly, is 239-770-6322. You can also look at my website, www.carerightinc.com. That's CARERIGHTINC.com.
That was so fabulous. And I'm sorry, I didn't realize we were coming right down to the end of this.
It goes quick.
Yeah. And so please get a hold of one of us. She and I work together, and we will help you any way we can. So with that, I do want to say next week we have an elder law attorney coming on, and we're going to continue this conversation. But please do stay in contact with Annalee and I if you have a need, and we'll be there to help you. So until next week, everyone, go out and live with more purpose, more passion, and prosperity.
And a plan.
Thank you for tuning in to the Care Right podcast. We hope today's discussion has provided you with valuable insights. If so, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share our podcast with others who might find it helpful. Remember, Care Right is more than just a podcast. It's a community dedicated to supporting family caregivers with comprehensive care planning, crisis management, and resources for every stage of aging. Stay connected with us for future episodes as we continue to explore essential topics in aging planning, elder care, and financial planning. Until next time, take care, plan wisely, and remember, you're not alone in your caregiving journey.